Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar today. We know how valuable your time is. My name is Eric Bentsen. I'm a sales application engineer with Schneider Electric. Today we'll be discussing the monitoring platform for our XW Pro hybrid inverter charger. So today we're going to be covering Insight local selection. We'll cover Xanbus, preparation, LAN connectivity, local firmware upgrades, Insight Cloud, remote firmware upgrades, and Insight Mobile. Selection of InsightHome or InsightFacility can depend on several factors, not the least of which are cost, system size, and Wi-Fi distance. InsightHome is about the same cost as the system control panel and was developed as a more cost-effective monitoring solution. We will be reviewing sizing guidelines in the coming slides. Both devices use the same firmware file. InsightHome has about 1/3 the Wi-Fi range as InsightFacility due to the antennas. InsightHome also has a single Xanbus network that is internally terminated, so it must be the first or last device in the Xanbus daisy chain. InsightHome has a single CAN bus port and a single RS-485 port. InsightFacility is virtually the same device as the gateway. For this presentation, any reference to Insight Local can be understood to mean either the gateway, InsightHome, or InsightFacility. 4 XW Pros takes up a significant amount of bandwidth for a single Xanbus network. You will easily have enough extra bandwidth to add a battery monitor and an AGS. However, you will not be able to add charge controllers to the same Xanbus network as the quad stack. For large DC-coupled systems such as this, use the secondary Xanbus network of InsightFacility, which will aggregate the devices from both Xanbus networks to a single web page on Insight Local and on Insight Cloud. Here are some Xanbus system sizing guidelines. For example, a quad stack of XW Pro AC coupled with the AGS and battery monitor is acceptable. Also keep in mind that the MPPT 100 can be used with very large systems to reduce the number of charge controllers required. For example, a quad stack with a similar amount of PV, 25 kW, would require 4 MPPT 100s, 6 MPPT 80s, or 8 MPPT 60s. Xanbus and sync cables are simply straight-through Ethernet cables that you can pick up just about anywhere. Some folks consider themselves to be expert makers of Ethernet cables. There's nothing wrong with making your own. However, experience has shown that just because a cable tests good in a typical Ethernet cable tester, it may not perform adequately under Xanbus load. So bring a couple of extra new Ethernet cables to the site with you, just in case. Xanbus should be terminated at both ends. The sync cables do not get terminated. Do not mistakenly plug an Ethernet cable from your router or modem into Xanbus or vice versa, as equipment damage may result. If you mix up Xanbus and sync, it will not cause damage, but it will create a multi-unit event. Insight Local can be powered by Xanbus. However, Insight Local does not supply Xanbus network power, which is actually supplied by XW Pro and the high voltage MPPT models only. For applications that use MPPT 60 with no inverters, the MPPT 60 aux port can be used to supply Xanbus power. Each MPPT 60 aux port provides 12 volts DC at 150 milliamps. Daisy chain is the preferred method for connecting Xanbus devices. A multi-drop backbone is not recommended. Every Xanbus device has 2 Xanbus ports to daisy chain together any number of devices. The only exception is InsightHome, which has a single Xanbus port internally terminated at 120 ohms. Every Xanbus device except InsightHome ships with a network terminator. Please be careful not to throw them away and save any extras, as these are no longer sold separately. Xanbus is a peer-to-peer network, so the order of devices is irrelevant. The purpose of this training is to provide best practices for system commissioning, verification of basic system functions, and how to avoid common mistakes. Be prepared when going to the site, especially if that site is some distance away. Make sure to visit our website at sesolar.com and download the latest firmware files for all the devices you will be installing. If internet is not available at the site, you can set up your Inside Cloud account and create the site later if you record InsightHome or InsightFacility MAC address and serial number. I usually snap a picture of the label on the device, which has all the necessary info, including the Wi-Fi password. Bring a couple of extra known good Ethernet cables. It's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them. Always put safety at the forefront of everything you do. Observe safe boundaries when electrical panels are removed, when their covers are removed, and make sure that no one is exposed to a shock hazard. Use proper PPE, appropriate for the incident energy, and observe COVID-19 precautions. When commissioning your system, leave all the covers removed so you can plug in the Xanbus and sync cables and leave them hanging until you verify that all devices are communicating without issue. Some signs of Xanbus instability are missing data fields, or a device may not show up at all. Engineering designed grounded raceways into our equipment to keep communication cables isolated from sources of radiated electrical noise. This is because Xanbus network is an isolated network from chassis ground. As such, there is no metal contact in the RJ45 jack for a shielded cable to make contact with ground. You will note the RJ45 jacks are all plastic. Make sure the total inclusive length of all the Xanbus cables in the network do not exceed 130 feet. If a router is available at the site, you can plug an Ethernet cable from the Ethernet port of InsightHome or InsightFacility to the LAN port of the router, which will in turn communicate with your computer wirelessly if it has that capability, or you can hardwire your computer to the LAN port of the router as well. Then simply plug a thumb drive into the USB port of InsightFacility or InsightHome for about 5 seconds. It'll beep twice, then transfer the thumb drive to your laptop. Look for an HTML file named after the serial number of InsightLocal. Once connected, you can set up InsightLocal for Wi-Fi station mode to remove the hardwired connection if so desired. The wireless range of InsightHome is about 30 feet without walls or obstructions. InsightFacility is about 100 feet. Individual results may vary depending on obstructions or other Wi-Fi networks in the area. Wi-Fi extenders have been reported to help in some cases where additional distance is required. Of course, power line adapters are also an option for longer distances. Wi-Fi access point or Wi-Fi hotspot means InsightLocal is communicating directly with a computer. There are 3 different ways to get InsightLocal connected: hardwired, Wi-Fi station mode, or Wi-Fi access point. You will not have an internet connection in Wi-Fi access point mode, but it's probably the easiest means of connection to commission the system. Simply look for the broadcast Wi-Fi system in your list of available Wi-Fi networks, and then click connect, and you will be required to enter a password. This is located on a sticker on the back of InsightHome or InsightFacility. Once connected, enter the default IP address of 192.168.100.1 into your web browser. You'll get a security warning. Click Proceed to access the web page. Then you can log into InsightLocal. The default username is admin and the password is admin123. You will be required to change it. If InsightHome or InsightFacility doesn't have the latest firmware. As indicated on the top left of the web page, click Status, Firmware Upgrade, and then browse for the ePackage file that you saved to your computer from the website. Upgrading InsightHome or InsightFacility firmware takes about 5 minutes. Then you'll be required to restart the gateway by clicking on a pop-up. Once the gateway is restarted and you have logged back in, click on the Devices tab. The XW Pro units will be listed as devices. Click on the first XW Pro icon. Note that all devices can be placed into standby with a click of a button on the upper right side of the web page. Because we are adding so many new developments to XW Pro and Insight Local, it is likely these devices will require firmware upgrades at every new installation. Some other Xanbus devices, such as MPPT60, Battery Monitor, and AGS, haven't had new firmware for quite some time, so they will not likely require firmware upgrades. Next, click the Firmware tab for XW Pro. Every device has a dedicated Firmware tab. Browse to the location where you saved the latest 12240 firmware to your computer by clicking Upgrade All XWs if you have a multi-unit system. Once you select the file, the upgrade process will proceed. The total time to update each XW Pro firmware is about 10 minutes, so be patient. Multiply that times the number of inverters. After the process is completed, click on the icon for each XW Pro to verify that the latest firmware has indeed been loaded. After the latest firmware is verified on all units, click Setup, Region Settings, enter the Region Settings passcode, which is indicated on the screen, and click OK. Then select and apply the appropriate region code for your utility. Off-grid can select IEEE 1547. Each XW Pro has a dedicated grid code section that uses the same password. Verify the correct region code appears in XW Pro. For a multi-unit system, each XW Pro has a dedicated configuration menu. XW Pro defaults to split-phase master and is assigned device number 1 by default, so you really only need to program the slaves. Navigate to Advanced Multi-Unit Config and select Split-Phase Slave from the drop-down menu. Click Apply. You can see there are many selections in the multi-unit config menu. We typically only use split-phase and three-phase options. Next, navigate to the device identification section and select device number 2 for the first slave and number 3 for the second slave, and so on. Numbering is irrelevant provided each XW Pro has a different device number, and then click Apply. Once you've programmed for multi-unit operation, it's time to set the system up for how you intend to use it. Battery type and capacity must be set in each XW Pro unless you are using a compatible BMS. If a router is available at the site, you can plug an Ethernet cable from the Ethernet port of InsightHome or InsightFacility to the local area network port of the router, which in turn may communicate with your computer wirelessly if it has that capability, or you can hardwire your computer to the LAN port as well. Then simply plug a thumb drive into the USB port of InsightFacility for about 10 seconds. Then transfer the thumb drive to your laptop. Look for an HTML file which has the same number as the serial number. Once connected, you can set up InsightFacility for Wi-Fi station mode. If you're not hardwired to your router and you want to push data to Insight Cloud, you will need to set up for Wi-Fi station mode, meaning Insight Local will be communicating with your router wirelessly rather than your laptop. To set up for Wi-Fi station mode, simply click Setup, Network, and then Wi-Fi and Ethernet settings. Once you find your Wi-Fi network, enter the password and click Connect. If you previously had hardwired your router, remove the Ethernet connection and power cycle the Insight Local device. Then use a thumb drive to discover the IP address. Alternately, you can use Wi-Fi access point mode and then log back into the gateway web page. You'll be able to see the DHCP address assigned by your router in the About section. For security reasons, network time protocol was not implemented in InsightLocal, making it necessary to manually enter the date and time. If the date and time are incorrect, you will not have connectivity to Insight Cloud. This is the most common cause of Insight Cloud connectivity issues. Once you're connected to your router, either hardwired or in Wi-Fi station mode, it's time to set up your connection to Insight Cloud. The web address is indicated. Then click Sign Up and enter your personal details, including your email address and password. Once logged into Insight Cloud for the first time, you can click Create Site and enter the site name and the MAC address and serial number for InsightLocal. This is where the photo of the label comes in handy, or you can save a screenshot of the About screen. You can even copy these from the About page and paste them into the site registration fields. The home screen of Insight Cloud can list an unlimited number of different sites. You can also hide selected sites. The home screen will show the connection status of each site, the battery voltage, battery state of charge, generator status, grid status, firmware revision of InsightLocal, and the weather. Once you click on the desired site, the web page layout displays the performance screen, where you will see active direction of power flow with the magnitude indicated. Probably the most valuable feature to installers is the ability to perform firmware upgrades remotely. It's always the best practice to have the latest firmware in all devices. Now you can perform firmware upgrades from the comfort of your own office. By clicking on the Firmware tab, you will see a list of all devices, their current firmware revision, and new firmware available. You can see here that InsightLocal, in this case the Gateway, and the XW Pro need updates. Before proceeding with any firmware update, you'll receive a pop-up warning that firmware upgrades to the inverter causes power loss to the grid forming power. If power is lost to the router, the firmware upgrade cannot proceed until the system is put into bypass, meaning either grid or generator will need to be available to bypass the XW Pro and keep the router powered on. Regarding bypass capability, we provide an interlocked bypass breaker with the mini PDP, the full-size PDP, and the 12240 breaker kit for dual XW Pro systems. There is no bypass interlock for triple and quad stacks, as these typically use external automatic transfer switches. Confirm grid or generator is present on Insight Cloud performance screen before proceeding with a firmware upgrade on XW Pro in this case. Every homeowner should be trained by their installer on how to put the system in bypass. If you wish to perform a remote firmware upgrade on XW Pro, make sure the homeowner is available to put the system into bypass until the upgrade is complete. Upgrading firmware is reserved for admin and solar installer privileges. You must know the password for the InsightLocal device at the site to proceed. It takes about 5 minutes for the upgrade to start, then an additional 5 minutes or so to complete. Rebooting InsightLocal is the last step. You will not see the upgrade reflected in the device list until you log out of Insight Cloud and then back in. Device performance analysis allows the installer to see trends at the device level. This is important when you need to determine how much stored energy is being used and when. For example, if I want to see the depth of discharge of the battery on a daily basis, I can select the battery monitor from the device list. Here you can see the storage utilization on a given day. You can make changes to device settings through the cloud. This is an extremely valuable tool for installers to have available to them, especially for time of use. Insight Mobile provides you with the peace of mind that everything is working properly with your solar plus storage investment. Insight Mobile provides the weather and temperature with improved graphs and push notifications whenever an event occurs. You will even be alerted when new firmware is available. When visiting our website at sesolar.com, be sure to register as an installer for access to live tech support. You can find upcoming webinars on our blog. We have an entire series of great webinar content for 2021, so stay tuned for upcoming events. Some webinars have 2 sessions, but if you happen to miss a webinar, you can find replays on the website. For installers who are familiar with our products, we encourage you to reach out for info on how to become a preferred installer in your area. This concludes this presentation.